Hello, this is Stephen E. Andrews, outlaw bookseller and author of 100 must-read science fiction novels, amongst other things, and welcome to Reading List Rock, the thread on my channel where I look at the intersection between literature, rock music, film and other culture. Today I want to talk about a song we all know and love from Hunky Dory by David Bowie. The song is Oh You Pretty Things. Just taking a quick look at the album here. Like I'm sure many of you Bowie fans out there, I've got lots of copies of this. This is a Rykodisc clear vinyl one from around about 1990. I don't think I've ever actually played that. I tell a lie, I did, because at one point it was the only way you could get Bombers. So I have actually played that one. A lot of my vinyl I don't get around to playing because there's hundreds of CDs piled up on the record player. So Oh You Pretty Things, which we know and love from Hunky Dory. What I want to do is to look at some lyrical sources and discuss the song in a bit more detail. So please subscribe, check my other videos, and let's see what we can come up with. So if you look on the Wikipedia page for Oh You Pretty Things, you'll see a section on the inspirations, the lyrics, the subject, what have you, and you'll see all sorts of things covered. You'll see a mention of Aleister Crowley, the notorious 20th century occultist, who of course was a member of the Golden Dawn Society, which I'm assuming they're implying is a reference to the golden rays mentioned in the track. Obviously Bowie was interested in Crowley anyway. He's mentioning Quicksand from the same album, of course. And also Nietzsche gets a mention, and the Master Race. There's a lot of those sort of things going on in Hunky Dory and The Man Who Sold the World, and you know, they're very interesting things, and there's various songs came out of them, arguably influenced by them. There's also a mention of a couple of science fiction novels as well, and I want to look into that in a bit more depth. What I would say is the key influence upon Oh You Pretty Things is probably a book which isn't mentioned on the Wikipedia page, and it's rarely mentioned by Bowie scholars, yet it seemed obvious to me for many years that it's one of the lyrical sources of the song. That book is a novel by John Wyndham, author of Day of the Triffids, and it's his novel The Midwich Cuckoos, which I consider his finest work. This is what it looks like. To explain why I think Oh You Pretty Things was at least inspired partly, if not majorly, by Wyndham's novel, I need to explain the plot a little if you're unfamiliar with it. I'll try and avoid spoilers. If you've never read it, it's a fantastic novel. In my opinion, as a science fiction historian and critic, it is his best novel, and it's from his early period where he was really cooking and was very, very popular, huge bestseller, and he brought an English storytelling style to SF after his early days when he tried to write in an American mode. And he was probably the first major English literary science fiction writer since Wells, even though Olaf Stapleton has a claim to that as well, but he's very, very cosmic. But Wyndham is more down to earth and accessible to the average reader, and I'm a huge fan. If you look elsewhere in the channel, you see a video I did about his tie, of all things. So the plot of The Midwich Cuckoos is set in a small southern, probably southwestern, sort of hints of Hampshire, Oxfordshire, Wiltshire, maybe Dorset, a small village in an area like that called Midwich. And in America the book's called Rebirth, which is a rather dull title, but of course Midwich does sound parochial and English. So in the novel, one day everybody in the village falls asleep. Nobody can enter the village. There's an invisible barrier formed by some sort of gas or other substance that is invisible. Nobody understands it. The army are called out to investigate, and after 24 hours they're able to enter the village again. The plot then follows what happens afterwards. It appears that every female in the village who is capable of bearing a child is pregnant, which is quite a shock to everybody there, and it's a very 50s milieu, as I say. The 24-hour period in which Midwich is asleep and nobody can enter without falling asleep is called the day out. We see the story through the eyes of a narrator who spends time in Midwich in the years after that, then goes away and comes back a few years later. The key protagonist of the novel, however, is a philosopher and writer called Gordon Zellaby, and he is the moral voice of the book. He is the carrier, as it were, of Wyndham's messages that he wanted to make in the novel. If you've never read the book, you may well have seen the film version, Village of the Damned. There is a later version by John Carpenter, which sadly isn't much cop. It's not one of Carpenter's great films. It's after his classic period. And there's also a quasi-sequel from the 60s, another British film called Children of the Damned, which is also well worth seeing, but slightly different. And even though, as I say, it's regarded as a sequel, I personally don't see it as being a Wyndham story in any way. So, in the Wikipedia page, you'll see a mention of this book, Childhood's End, by Arthur C. Clarke, which is a really famous science fiction novel from the 50s, and it's about a race coming from the stars, and they look rather like devils, unfortunately, and they're huge spaceships hover above the cities of the planet. This was ripped off enormously for the fun but rather silly film Independence Day. Despite their appearance, the aliens are benign, and they start working with a new race of children being born who are going to evolve way beyond their parents in terms of their prowess, their powers, their possibilities. And this is cited very much, by a lot of Bowie critics as the source, the main source of Oh You Pretty Things. And I can understand that, and I do think it's obviously an influence, because this was a really popular novel, and in my opinion, probably Clarke's best novel. So, moving on from that, we also see references to another science fiction novel, which again isn't mentioned in the Wikipedia page. That's a novel called Mutant by Henry Kuttner. I've done a video about this as well. I probably will do some more about Henry Kuttner because he's a very interesting writer. He died in 1958, and this is a book fixed up, as we say, from stories that he wrote through late 40s, early 50s. And these stories are about telepathic mutants. And basically, Kuttner used the term Homo superior here, which appears in the lyrics of Oh You Pretty Things, of course, and also had been used 10 years before that by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in their classic Marvel comic X-Men. The X-Men are mutants and refer to themselves as Homo superior. As I say, in the video I've done on Mutant, you'll see all the detail there. So there are two things there, one mentioned in the Wikipedia page, one not. But is there more to Hunky Dory beyond that? Yes, as I say, there's John Wyndham. So what I want to do now is talk about Wyndham's book in a bit more detail and pick up the lyrics that I feel underline it as a source. In the meantime, we'll have a quick listen to a little bit of Oh You Pretty Things. So in the first verse, there's a section where Bowie sings, "Wake up, you sleepy head." Now when the day out occurs in Midwich, and everybody is coming round, there is a scene at the house of Gordon Zellaby, the philosopher, writer and folklorist character. He and his wife wake up in their living room, and they're freezing cold, and they can't light the fire. And there's a lyric in the song, the first verse again, where Bowie sings, "Put another log on the fire for me, we'll have some breakfast and coffee," because it's early morning, it sort of happened overnight. And they're so cold they can't get the fire to light, and that's sort of a major scene. So straight away there we see a reference possibly to the day out from the Midwich Cuckoos. And then as it goes into the chorus, Bowie sings, "All the nightmares came today, and it looks as if they're here to stay." And the nightmare of the day out, as I say, is that suddenly all the women in Midwich have become host mothers. They have had alien eggs implanted in their wombs, but they don't know that yet. So moving on, we go to another part of the song. There's a reference to the Stooges' No Fun for Me. There the references to Making Way for Homo Superior, because what happens is the host children in the wombs of the women of Midwich are born. They appear normal, but they have strange golden eyes, golden hair, and they grow and mature very rapidly. They are the coming race. Something that's mentioned by Bowie scholars a lot is that the coming race is the title of a late 19th century science fiction novel by Edward Bulwer Lytton. At the time when it was published, it was actually called Vril. This is what it looks like now. As I say, the coming race was originally entitled Vril, and Vril was a form of energy, and the coming race were beings from underneath the earth, subterranean beings. And it was such a popular novel that the word Vril, which was I think entirely made up, was co-opted by a firm making a beverage, Bovril. So for those of you who are old enough to remember Bovril, which you'd have to be sort of like born in the 50s or 60s, I guess, like me. So Bovril, which is kind of forgotten now, comes from the coming race. So a lot is made of this by critics because they, it's an easy thing to look up even in the days before the internet. But as I say, for me, it's all about Wyndham. So looking at the lyrics again, there's a line where Bowie sings, "A puzzled man who questioned what we were here for." And as I say, Gordon Zellaby, the protagonist of the novel, is a philosopher and writer. And throughout the book, he has a moral struggle because he soon discovers that the children are a gestalt entity, a hive mind. Even though there were about, I think, 28 of them, half male, half female, he realizes that really there are only two individuals, a male and a female, but they have multiple bodies. They're connected across space by telepathy, the sharing of their mental and nervous systems. Zellaby realizes that they present a threat because these children have a strange compulsive power. They can make you, through psionic power, do things you don't want to do. And you see the people of Midwich gradually falling under their thrall, resentful, and whenever they try and fight back, terrible accidents occur. Throughout this, Zellaby is trying to decide what to do. How can he save Midwich? And it's a big moral question because Wyndham's key thing, really, he's been called the cosy catastrophist, but really what Wyndham was about was looking at messages of social Darwinism and survival. Is it right to kill to survive, especially if the race is to be preserved? And he tackled this in Midwich Cuckoos, where Homo Superior appears from another planet, basically, and threatens Homo sapiens. And he tackled it again in another book from that period called The Chrysalids, which is written from the point of view of mutants in the future after an atomic war who have developed telepathic powers. And that's very, very like Kuttner's Mutant. It's the very same theme, very different sort of writing, and it's set in Newfoundland about 2,000 years after a nuclear holocaust. And it's a great book. I often find when I'm working in a bookshop, young people are given Day the Triffids by their parents who have to read to get them into reading adult books, when really they should read The Chrysalids first. It's a much better book for young people, and in my opinion, a better book. So Zellaby is the puzzled man who questions what we're here for, and he is trying to decide how he can act. Is it right to somehow destroy the children, save Midwich, and save the planet, or should they just bow to the inevitable of evolution, of the Darwinian impulse in nature? So while the children of Midwich are driving their mamas and papas insane, making them prick themselves with needles, driving into walls, that sort of thing, making them fight each other when they try and storm their school, there's all sorts of stuff going on. The mamas and papas going insane because they have to make way for Homo Superior, then it's a real moral question for him. And in the end, he solves the moral question, and there is a message. Whether that was Wyndham's message, we can't put any message from a character into an author's mouth. Fiction is fiction. You cannot assume that anything, even a point of view character says, philosophically, morally, ethically, intellectually, is the intention of the author, because fiction is just a story. But it was a theme that ran throughout Wyndham's work. So listen again to Oh You Pretty Things and think about putting another log on the fire and waking up in the cold, about the nightmares coming today, about Homo superior, the coming race. And think about Gordon Zellaby of John Wyndham's The Midwich Cuckoos, the puzzled man who questioned what we were here for. Hope you've enjoyed this. There'll be more Bowie to come. I'm going to do something soon on a lyrical influence over the song Diamond Dogs, which again I think a few people have picked up on. I mentioned it in print about 15 years ago. And if you enjoy this, please subscribe. If you want me to cover anything in classic rock and roll, especially from the late 60s, 70s, 80s of the literary theme, I'd be happy to hear from you. Thanks for listening. This is Outlaw Bookseller signing out.